It's not easy to hear, but it's a reality we must accept. Nobody truly cares, at least not in the way we often wish they would. People are generally focused on their own survival, their own goals, their own emotional regulation, their own issues, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just how humans are wired. Once we understand this from a biological and psychological lens, we're no longer surprised by it. Instead, we're empowered to turn our attention inward, where the real work happens. The human brain is evolutionarily adapted to pay attention to what is most salient to our survival and reproduction. This doesn't always mean physical survival. It includes social standing, self-image, status, and perception. The truth is, people notice what's relevant to them. Your struggles, your failures, your fears, they're rarely as significant to others as they are to you. That's because of something called allocentric neglect. It's the tendency to minimize the importance of others' internal experiences because they're not mapped onto our own neurological schema. This isn't meant to discourage empathy or compassion. In fact, understanding this leads to greater emotional intelligence. But in terms of how you move through life, especially when trying to achieve something meaningful, whether it's physical transformation, intellectual mastery, or emotional growth, you must fundamentally operate under the assumption that the responsibility lies with you. People can support you, people can cheer you on, but they can't do the work, and often they won't even notice the effort, only the results if they're dramatic enough. Now, from a neurobiological standpoint, motivation and attention are closely intertwined. Dopamine is not just the molecule of pleasure, it's the molecule of pursuit. When you set a goal and start moving toward it, dopamine is released to reinforce the behavior. But here's where things get important. External validation can actually hijack that system. When you constantly seek approval or recognition, your brain starts associating the release of dopamine not with the pursuit itself, but with the feedback loop of being seen or praised. This is a dangerous trap. Why? Because when that feedback doesn't come, and it often doesn't, you feel depleted, unmotivated, and lost. This is the problem with outsourcing your sense of purpose to others. It's a form of cognitive dissonance. The work you're doing doesn't feel meaningful unless someone else acknowledges it. That's a broken system. To function optimally, especially in today's highly stimulating environment, you have to internalize your reward system. That means learning to generate dopamine from the process itself. From small wins, from the satisfaction of showing up even when nobody claps for you, the act of doing hard things, of facing resistance and choosing growth, that can be inherently rewarding, but only when you train your brain to recognize it as such. This is not about ego or selfishness. Focusing on yourself is about establishing agency. Agency is the belief and ability to influence your own thoughts, emotions, and actions. It's built through consistent practice, through emotional regulation, through discipline. And none of those things are possible if your nervous system is hijacked by the expectation of external approval. Think about what happens when people experience setbacks, breakups, failure in business, academic pressure, social isolation. Often, the first instinct is to look around and wonder, does anyone see me struggling? When no one does, the despair grows, but here's the paradox. The very act of waiting for someone to notice you suffering keeps you from acting on your own behalf. This is where self-respect and neuroplasticity intersect. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to experience, is greatest when you're in a state of focused attention combined with emotional intensity. You can leverage this. If you're in pain and you focus deeply on what needs to change, you create powerful conditions for change, but you must act. You can't outsource the initiation. When you focus on yourself, you're not denying connection. You're building the foundation for connection. Strong people attract strong relationships. Emotionally regulated individuals are magnets for trust and respect. But you don't become that by begging the world to notice you. You become that by doing the inner work that nobody sees, by getting up when it's hard, by facing yourself with honesty, by taking full responsibility for your own neurochemical state. There's a common misconception that resilience is something you're born with. That's not true. Resilience is trained. It's what happens when you repeatedly expose yourself to stressors and respond with adaptation rather than collapse. And to do that, you need a reason, a why, but your why has to come from you, not from public applause or approval. Let me give you a neurological framework. Every time you choose a hard path and complete it, whether it's finishing a workout, staying calm in an argument, or resisting a temptation, you send a signal to your prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function. That signal says, I'm in charge. You reinforce that circuit. Over time, this builds what's called top-down control, your ability to regulate emotional responses rather than be ruled by them. You won't do this if your entire sense of purpose is anchored in whether people are watching. You won't build resilience if your motivation crumbles when nobody says good job. In fact, if you train yourself to need that, you're training weakness into your system. You're reinforcing dependency, not sovereignty. So how do you make the shift? How do you go from needing validation to owning your path? Start by recognizing the cognitive traps. The default mode network in your brain is constantly running narratives about you, who you are, what people think of you, whether you're good enough. That's normal, but you don't have to believe every thought. You can disrupt those loops through practices that increase introspection, your awareness of internal states, meditation, breathwork, even cold exposure. They train you to anchor attention in the body rather than in narrative. That's powerful. Next, set systems instead of goals. Systems are repeatable actions that lead to desired outcomes. Goals are useful, but without systems, they're fantasies. When you wake up every day and follow a system that's aligned with your values, you no longer need motivation. You just execute, and that system becomes your identity. Also, limit the input from external sources. Every time you scroll through social media, your brain is comparing. It's designed to do that. The problem is, you're comparing your internal state to someone else's highlight reel. That creates a mismatch. It lowers your baseline dopamine and increases cortisol. Over time, that damages your motivation and self-trust. If you want to focus on yourself, you have to curate your environment. Your brain is not designed to thrive in an overstimulated digital landscape. You must protect your attention like it's your most valuable asset, because it is. Where your attention goes, your energy follows. And where your energy goes, your life follows. Here's a truth rooted in neuroscience and psychology. Human beings have a limited capacity for attention. It's called the attentional bottleneck. If your attention is split between what people think of you, whether you're being noticed, whether you're keeping up, then it's not available for the deep work required to actually improve yourself. That's the real tragedy. Not just that nobody cares, but that while you're worrying about whether they do, you're wasting the one thing that can actually change your life, your focused effort. People say self-love is the answer. I disagree, not at first. First, it's self-discipline. Love follows discipline. When you show up for yourself repeatedly, when you become someone you can trust, love emerges naturally, and that love is resilient. It's not based on mood, it's based on action. That's what allows you to stop chasing validation. You become the source of your own worth. When you realize nobody cares, don't despair, be grateful, because now you're free. You're no longer performing. You're no longer enslaved to perception. You're now in the realm of real growth, because anything done without the promise of applause is done from integrity. That's where character is forged. In neuroscience, we talk about long-term potentiation, the strengthening of synapses through repeated use. The same applies to your habits, your mindset, your emotional responses. The more you choose yourself, the stronger that circuitry becomes. Over time, it becomes who you are, not someone who needs to be seen, someone who knows where they're going and keeps walking, no matter who's watching. So yes, nobody cares. That's not a curse, it's a calling. Focus on yourself, not out of spite, not out of ego, but out of respect. Respect for your potential, respect for the limited time you have on this planet, respect for the people you will impact once you've done the work on yourself. There's a kind of peace that comes from this mindset, a quiet confidence, not loud, not performative, just solid, reliable, focused. That's what builds momentum. That's what compounds over time. That's what turns dreams into realities. You don't need to be known, you need to be effective. You don't need to be liked, you need to be grounded. You don't need to be praised, you need to be aligned. And all of that starts the moment you stop looking outward and begin decisively to look within. Your biology is ready, your brain is plastic, your nervous system is adaptable, the conditions for growth are present. All you need to do is decide that nobody caring isn't a deficit, it's an opportunity. The opportunity to become someone so grounded in purpose, so aligned with process that results become inevitable, and when they arrive, you'll recognize them not as validation, but as a byproduct of who you chose to become when no one was watching. Let me know if you'd like this formatted for a particular platform video script, social media post, or blog. Of course, here's the continued speech, extending the original by approximately 2,000 more words, maintaining the tone, depth, and analytical precision inspired by Dr. Andrew Huberman's style, focusing on neuroscience, behavior, and self-regulation without any headings or concluding paragraph. When you strip away the noise, the accolades, the followers, the comments, what you're left with is the truth of your process. And in that quiet, in that stillness, you'll either be in alignment with your purpose or you'll feel the tension of avoidance. That tensions, ecologically and physiologically, creates internal conflict. Your autonomic nervous system responds to it, heart rate variability drops, cortisol elevates, you experience it as stress, agitation, even self-doubt, not because the world is against you, but because your internal compass is pointing somewhere you're refusing to go. We live in a time where distraction is easier than direction, and the reason is simple. Distraction is neurologically rewarding in the short term. Every time you avoid what needs to be done and opt for temporary stimulation, be it scrolling, gossiping, or mindless consumption, you receive a spike of dopamine, but this is shallow dopamine, poorly tethered to effort and learning. It spikes and crashes quickly, leading to fatigue and restlessness. Over time, you develop a dependency on stimulation rather than mastery. You become a dopamine junkie, chasing novelty instead of anchoring into routine. True focus is chemically uncomfortable at first. When you begin to direct your attention on one task, especially one that challenges you, your brain resists. The anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for conflict monitoring, becomes highly active. This is why starting is so difficult. It's not laziness. It's friction in the brain's attempt to switch from default mode to task mode. But once you move through that barrier, once you ignore the impulse to be distracted, you activate the prefrontal cortex and basal ganglia pathways that sustain deep focus. This is the zone where learning happens, where transformation becomes possible. People often say they want discipline, but what they really need is friction tolerance, the ability to endure the internal resistance that comes before momentum. That's not something that's taught in school. It's something you train like a muscle. You train it by doing one more rep when you're tired, by sitting in the discomfort of silence instead of reaching for your phone, by delaying gratification not because it's moral, but because it leads to deeper neural wiring and greater emotional stability. One of the most misunderstood aspects of high performance, whether in academics, athletics, business, or emotional life, is that it doesn't feel good while you're doing it. There's a false narrative that alignment always feels peaceful. That's not biology, that's fiction. Real growth is often frustrating. It's mentally taxing. It takes place at the edge of your capacity. Key is knowing what that edge feels like and staying there long enough to adapt. Your nervous system adapts through exposure, not once, not occasionally, through consistent, repeated exposure to stress followed by adequate recovery. This is the stress, recovery, adaptation cycle. You apply it to the body through exercise, you apply it to the brain through focus and learning, and you apply it to the spirit through solitude and self-confrontation. None of these processes are visible to others, but they are the foundation for everything that is. Most people don't focus on themselves not because they can't, but because it's uncomfortable to sit in the mirror of personal responsibility. It's easier to blame, to project, to distract, to wait, but each of those is a form of cognitive escape, and over time, escape becomes identity. You begin to define yourself not by who you are, but by what you avoid. This is where neuro-association plays a massive role. The brain wires together behavior and emotion. If every time you sit down to work, you associate it with stress, boredom, or fear of failure, your brain will begin to resist it reflexively. But if you consistently override that resistance, even in small ways, you build new associations. Eventually, your brain will connect effort with pride, struggle with meaning. That's when things begin to shift. But the only way to reach that place is to do it anyway, especially when you don't feel like it, especially when no one's watching. People say confidence is belief in yourself, but that's only half the truth. Real confidence is earned. It's built through self-directed action repeated over time. It's biological. When you succeed at a challenge, even a small one, your brain releases neurochemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine. These reinforce the behavior, they sharpen focus, increase drive, and regulate mood, but they don't get released when you fantasize, only when you act. That's why focusing on yourself is not a mindset, it's a protocol. It's a daily, biological sequence of actions designed to rewire your behavior, your cognition, and your emotional range. It's about doing hard things intentionally and repeatedly until your brain recognizes you as someone who follows through. This is what transforms identity, not affirmations, not intentions, behavior. The people who build powerful, meaningful lives are not exempt from pain. In fact, they're often in greater contact with it. The difference is, they've built the resilience to keep going, and that resilience didn't come from being admired. It came from being alone with their thoughts, from doing reps in the dark, from enduring failure, not once, but many times, and still showing up the next day. You want people to notice you, good, but become someone worth noticing. That doesn't mean chasing fame or validation. It means doing the deep, unglamorous work that leads to mastery. It means studying when others are partying, training when others are sleeping, reflecting when others are projecting. It means becoming so radically aligned with your process that the outcome becomes irrelevant, because at that point, you've already won. You've become someone you can trust. There's something sacred about self-trust. It's not loud, it's not performative, it's quiet, steady, unshakable, and it gives you power in a world that's obsessed with attention. Because when your internal world is calibrated, when your neurochemistry and your psychology are working in unison, you don't need to seek, you attract, not because you're flashy, because you're solid. Think about what this means physiologically. When you live in alignment with your goals, your cortisol rhythm stabilizes, your sleep improves, your energy levels become more consistent, your immune system strengthens, your emotional reactivity decreases. These aren't abstract benefits. These are biological realities that result from behavioral integrity. But the inverse is also true. When you live for other people's approval, when your actions are dictated by the need to be liked or praised, you enter a chronic stress loop, you experience anticipatory anxiety, your prefrontal cortex begins to shut down, you lose access to creative thought, you default to primitive survival behavior, pleasing, avoiding, overreacting, hiding. That's not thriving, that's barely surviving. You were not built to live like that. Your brain was designed for challenge, for growth, for the pursuit of meaning. But meaning doesn't fall into your lap, it's constructed, neuron by neuron through intentional action. Every time you tell yourself it's too late, no one cares, I'll start tomorrow, you reinforce neural pathways of inaction, and your brain adapts to that narrative. But the moment you flip the script, even in small ways, you signal your brain to adapt in a new direction. You can literally rewire your life by choosing the difficult path. It doesn't have to be massive, it just has to be real. Wake up 5 minutes earlier, hold your posture when you want to slouch, breathe through frustration instead of reacting, do one more set when you want to quit. All of these are signals to your brain. I am not controlled by impulse. I am not dependent on attention. I am capable of growth. Nobody cares. Good, that means the stage is clear. You're free to build without comparison, to train without performance, to become without pressure. That's the most fertile ground for greatness. There is a deep neurochemical satisfaction that arises when you live in alignment. It's not euphoric. It's not loud. It's a quiet sense of certainty, a biochemical confidence that says, I did what I said I would. That feeling is worth more than applause because it lasts and it builds. Every day you show up for yourself, that signal gets stronger. Your mind and body are in constant communication. What you do physically affects your thoughts. What you think affects your physiology. So if you want to shift your life, don't wait for your mind to feel ready. Start with action. Action drives emotion. Emotion drives identity. Identity drives destiny. People talk about destiny like it's something you find. It's not. It's something you build brick by brick. Behavior by behavior, alone, unseen, unnoticed, and then one day the world notices, but by then it doesn't matter because you're already someone you respect. This is not a motivational idea. This is grounded in behavioral neuroscience, neuroplasticity, and embodied psychology. You can't think your way into self-respect. You earn it through repeated, aligned action, through integrity with your own nervous system, through choosing what's hard over and over again. Most people will never experience this. Not because they're incapable, because they never got past the discomfort of starting, because they waited to be seen before they built. But that's not you. You don't need the world to care. You just need to decide that your future matters more than your comfort. And once you do, everything changes. Let me know if you'd like a summarized version, visual quotes, or video script based on this content. Here is a concluding paragraph that aligns with the tone, depth, and scientific clarity of the full speech. So when the world is silent, when recognition is absent, and when no one applauds your effort, lean in. That silence is not your enemy, it's your signal. It means the work is now pure, free from judgment, free from distortion, and fully yours. In that space, you are no longer performing, you are transforming. Your brain, your body, and your behavior begin to align not because others care, but because you do, and that's enough, that's more than enough, because the person who doesn't wait to be validated is the one who ultimately becomes undeniable. Focus on yourself, not out of bitterness, but out of biology, discipline, and truth. No one's coming to do it for you, but no one can stop you once you start.